Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Vanessa and I'm an indie author and I publish under the pen name A and Sage. If you are new to this channel, then welcome. Welcome to the community. I'm so excited you're here. If you're interested in listening to or watching videos where I talk about my writer journey, I have published 15 books so far in the YA, fantasy, sci-fi, etc. space. So if that's something you want to hear me talk about, or if you're interested in planning, productivity, and other creative type videos, then make sure that you are subscribed and that you hit the bell notification so you don't miss out on any videos. And in today's video, I'm doing something that I have been doing a lot more of, which is picking a video based on some of the questions that I get in the comments. If you have a video or a question or something that you want me to talk about, then make sure that you put it in the comments, because I do make notes of everything that you guys ask me about, and I try to make videos from as much of it as possible. And today I am going to be talking about working on multiple projects in 1 year. So I have mentioned in one of my videos before that when I was first writing Shadowhearse, during that year I published 8 books. And that was a lot to go through. I do not do that anymore. I would not recommend it for anyone starting out. At that point I had already written quite a few books, and so it was a little bit easier for me because I already knew just basically what my writing style is and how I work, and just in general, like how I plot my stories. And once I wrote the first book, it was kind of like bang, bang, bang. Now, if you are starting out, you might not know exactly what works for you, what doesn't work. So I would not recommend working on that many projects in a year. However, you can always work on more than one and give it a shot. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is some tips for working on multiple projects. Now, I'm going to talk about this more as working on different creative projects, not necessarily writing, because I think that these tips will apply to any other creative project that you might be working with. If you're an illustrator or a designer, like for example, I'm also a book cover designer, but a part of that is that I have courses on design and cover design and all different types of Photoshop things. And so I have multiple projects that go into a year that don't necessarily just mean writing multiple books. So planning that as well, and how to work on that. So for my first tip, which I already kind of sort of mentioned, is planning, right? If you want to succeed at something, you need to, at something that requires like more than one step, you need to plan it out. Otherwise, you're just going to get lost in it. And I don't necessarily mean that you have to become a plotter if you're not a plotter, but you need some planning to go into these projects so that you know what you're working on, when you're working on it, when it's going to be due or releasing, and that kind of thing. The way that I like to plan out my projects is I have a yearly calendar, and on that yearly calendar, I put away all of my releases, and that includes my book releases, my course releases, if there's any pre-mades that I'm working on every month, or anything else that I have going on, and that's going on my yearly calendar. And so I can see if I have certain months that I want to release, let's say a course, but I also have a book due, that's not very smart of me, right? I need to move some things around. And so I do this the year before. Like, so prior to the year when I do my yearly planning, that is part of what I do. So you want to make sure you're planning it out. Now, if you are writing a book and you are a plotter, then this will work well for you, because what you can actually do is you can plot out all of your projects ahead of time or by quarter or something. Let's say if you're working on 2 books, you can plot. So give yourself time at the beginning of the year to fully plot both the books. And then you're just writing, right? You're writing one, then the other, and so on. And in general, what you want for the most part, the point of planning is you want to be very, very organized. Prior to being a self-employed author and book cover designer and teacher, I worked as a senior director, and I worked where I had a creative team that I managed as part of my responsibilities. I loved my job. I loved my team, but it was the main portion of that job was to manage other people and to manage workloads for other people. And that required a heck of a lot of planning and figuring things out and calendar work. And I think that really helped me when I went off on my own to really figure out how to work on more than one thing. Not just at the same time, which I don't always recommend. For the most part, I don't recommend that. But how to work on multiple big projects in 1 year. It worked because I was able to do these calendar views and stick to them, and then figure out how to pivot when something didn't work. So part of planning is also pivoting. So make sure you have some leeway, some open space. And when you're planning, don't over plan and don't overload yourself. Be realistic with what you're planning. Like I mentioned, if you're looking at a month and you have more than one thing going on, and you know yourself, and you know you also want to take breaks and go on vacation, or you don't want to work weekends or whatever, or after 5 o'clock, if you have family, kids to take care of, then don't schedule yourself so heavy for those 2 months. Spread it out. No one's forcing you to put out whatever amount of projects, right? It's you make that decision. You plan it out. So plan it out in a way that works for your lifestyle. You also want to line up all of your outsourcing work early on. So if you are an author, and let's say you have an editor, you have a cover designer, I don't know what else. If you have an audiobook coming, you might have a narrator that you need to hire. So if you have all of these outsourced works that you are lining up for yourself early on, you want to make sure that you contact these people at the beginning of the year. You give them the dates that you've gotten from your planning. You book them ahead of time, and you have them maybe even start working on stuff so that everything is ready. You don't want to be thinking about it last minute. And also you don't want that part, that kind of administrative work of you contacting people or working with other people, to get in the way of you working on these projects, because it's going to slow you down when you're working on them. And the one thing you need when you're working on multiple projects is speed. You need to work a little faster just to give yourself more of a leeway. It's better to work a little faster at the beginning and have time left over at the end of the year or the end of the project than it is to work slower and then be rushing. From that planning also, from that you had before, something else is going to come out of it, which is my next step, and that is to decide on your daily productions. So you're going to decide very early on for each project that you're working on how much you can do daily. Now, it might mean that you're dividing your day up in half and you're working on 2 projects simultaneously. I know people who write under pen names, who write one pen name in the morning and one pen name in the afternoon. So you could figure that out. You could do that as well, but you need to decide that early on. And you need to decide how much you're writing, if that's the project you're working on. If you're working on a course like I do, you need to decide what you're doing, like how much are you recording and when you're recording. Are you doing it daily for a certain amount of time, or are you doing a little bit every week? These are all things you need to figure out, and you need to know what your daily productions are. And again, you need to make sure that they're realistic and that they work for your lifestyle. Now, when you're deciding on what these daily productions are, you want to divide your tasks into very small to-dos. This is a great thing to do because it keeps you going, and it really, really helps motivate you. So when you have a lot of projects on the go, it might become overwhelming. You might get very tired. You might want to drop things. So if you have small to-dos, checking them off will be kind of inspirational, and it will give you the energy that you need to keep moving, to keep going, and to stick to those projects. So I always recommend not having big bulky things. So don't say, I'm going to write a book, but divide that up. Say, I'm going to write 1 chapter a day, or I'm going to write 500 words a day. or I'm going to talk to my designer about the cover that I want, which means that the smaller task for that is I need to fill out a design brief, and I need to figure out what my characters are going to look like and whatever it might be, right? So just divide everything up into much smaller to-dos, and that's going to make it more exciting, more interesting for you when you are working on all these projects, because the more you check off, the more you want to keep working, because you feel like you're closer to the finish line. So you might as well make it easier for yourself to get there. One more thing you want to figure out early on. Again, everything is early on. Basically, if you're working on multiple projects, you want to do a whole bunch of other work ahead of time so that you are prepped and ready to work on these projects. So the next thing you want to do is create a marketing schedule for yourself. Now, chances are, if you're an author, if you're a creative of any kind, you will need to market yourself. And so you want to have that marketing schedule ahead of time. If you are running paid ads, you want to have the graphics for that, the copy for that. If you're testing, then it's ×3, ×4, whatever. You want to have all of that ready ahead of time. I would recommend setting up some kind of Google Drive or folder somewhere in your computer where you're keeping all that stuff per project, but just a separate folder, call it marketing materials, marketing. You'll have your schedule there. Any kind of calendar works. I use a physical planner, but you can use like a Google planner or the one, like whatever plan, like calendar you have on your phone, but just make sure that you have that schedule set up so that you know that, say, in June of next year, you need to be advertising this specific book, the launch of it, for example. And so you want to start working on that, but you don't want to work on it in that same month, because that month you might be finishing up the final touches, the final details of that particular project. You might be finishing the final draft of that book, or you might be editing that book, or you might be working with your beta team to finish off that book, right? So you want to make sure that you have all that schedule and everything that you need for it, for your marketing, done ahead of time. Because also keep in mind, if you are using, say, different street teams, or if you have to send your project somewhere for marketing, if you need to make any kind of marketing materials, you will need all of those done ahead of time too. So if you have that schedule in place, it's easier to work within it. And on the same kind of marketing, yes, under the same umbrella, you want to plan out all your launches. So you want to make sure that you have a full concrete plan for all of your launches, for all of your projects. And I am going to be working on a launch plan video that I'm going to have on this channel at some point, that will come with a checklist of what you can do for like a book launch or a creative project launch. So stick around for that. That is coming in the future, but for now I'm still working on it. But launches are something you definitely want to take very seriously, because no one's going to know about these projects that you have going on, and no one's going to know about the stuff that you're putting out there in the world if you don't talk about it. And the easiest way to talk about it is to launch it big, right? And I don't mean big as in like drown a bunch of money in advertising, but I just mean you want to make sure that your launch is set up to run flawlessly and that you are ready to tell the world about whatever projects are going to be out there. If you are launching projects, of course, which I'm assuming that if we're talking about books or any creative side projects or courses or whatever, you are launching them. So you want to make sure that you launch them well. Now, my next tip is don't start a project until one is finished. Now, I know I said that I know some authors who work simultaneously under different pen names. I don't know why. Sorry. This shirt has like these little tails you're supposed to tie, and I just didn't tie it because you can't see it, and I'm like a hot mess waist down. So I'm just playing with it on camera. I don't know how often they did that up to this point. Hopefully that was the only time, but I just noticed it in the viewfinder, and that's embarrassing. Anyways, cut. So don't start one project until the first one you're working on is finished. If you have trouble with keeping on track, and you want to work on multiple projects in a year, the reason you might have trouble keeping on track is that you're always jumping from one thing to the next. And the grass is always greener. And I fall into that trap myself, where right now I am working on the final book in my Shadowheart series, but I also have another story in mind. And that story is not even in the young adult genre. It's not a fantasy. Not at all. And so it is very much a very different story. So it's hard for me to not want to work on that story because Shadowhurst is planned for now, right? I have to work on it now, but because I have to work on it now, it feels more like work. Whereas this story, nothing's planned for it, it's just in my head. I haven't even worked it into this year's schedule, but it's there and it's a shiny new penny. And so that's what I want to concentrate on. So if you are like me, and if you usually have trouble working on many projects at the same time or in the same year, then try not to work on anything else until one is finished and force yourself to really finish one project. And then my final tip for working on multiple projects within 1 year is, if you can, announce it on social media, what you're working on, because that will help you with accountability. If you are the only person that knows what the projects are that you have lined up for this year, you might be able to convince yourself to drop something, not to do it. Let's say you planned out to work every day on 2 chapters, but nobody knows that this exists. So you could say to yourself, well, I'll just launch it later. I'll just finish the book later. I'll finish the course later. I'll finish this illustration later. But if you announce it, that is social accountability. It is out there in the world and people will know that you did not succeed in what you said you were going to do. And that it could be enough to kind of keep you going. Because if you're running out of steam, which is a lot of times what happens, I find what happens when you're working on multiple projects in 1 year, it's not that you can't multitask, because there's always ways to multitask. There's different apps you can use. You can ask friends to help you along. You can use planners. There's just different ways that you can help yourself with multitasking. But what happens is people run out of steam, right? And so if you're starting to run out of steam, I think the refresher is that that accountability you could get from other people knowing about this. And for me, oftentimes that's enough to be like, well, I could take a break and I could not finish and I am kind of being lazy today. However, if I don't finish, I already said I'm going to, and I'm going to look like a damn fool. So you might want to use that. It's, almost like cheating, but you might want to use that as your way of getting some accountability for yourself. Or if you have other friends in the same workspace as you, it might help to chat with them. You guys could form a group and say hey, if you're a writer, NaNoWriMo is a great place for that. That is a great form of accountability. Join that right now. There's a camp going on, so you could definitely still join and try to write as much as you can, or sign up for the one that happens later in the year. So lots of different ways to announce your project to the world, or your projects to the world, and then you have to do that. So those are all the tips that I have for you for multiple projects in 1 year. If you are working on more than one project in a year, then make sure you let me know. And if you are stuck on anything, then feel free to question in the comments and I will answer as soon as I can. I try to answer as fast as possible, but sometimes it takes me a bit of time just because I do have a newborn that I take care of, and I am back at work, and she's 3 months old only, so it's it's hectic around here. I feel like my life is right now is multiple projects, just my personal life, not to count all the work I still have to do. So with that said, I hope you all stay magical, enjoy your week and your weekend, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.